and welcome to another edition of Cracking the Cryptic. Now, I've been in India for the last 6 days or so, as Simon may have told you, at the World Sudoku Championship, and that was very interesting. I'd go so far as to say very exciting for me. I enjoy competitive solving, as you might guess. I do enjoy Sudokus, which not every crossword solver does, but there are some who do. And I do enjoy competing internationally. That's great fun. So I think over the next few weeks we will bring you some of the puzzles from the World Sudoku Championship, and you'll get a chance to see that there are an awful lot of variants used in Sudoku championships beyond the kind of classic style of puzzle. And those variants normally involve extra constraints, a bit like a killer Sudoku or something, but I think there were 150 different variants of this year's championships. It's about 16 hours of solving over 2 days, so it was quite an intense period. And one of the things I always notice at these events is that the best solvers, and I'll tell you in a moment how I got on, but the best solvers are way ahead of me and they solve everything at least twice as fast, and it's kind of mind-blowing for me to watch them. Now, whenever I tell Simon about this, he laughs and says, yeah, a bit like crosswords are new. So I guess it's a taste of my own medicine to the people that I compete against at the Times Crossword Championship to some extent, or has been for the last few years. Now, as I say, now that the Sudoku Championship is over, that means that I can turn my attention to the forthcoming Times Crossword Championship, which I think happens in a fraction over 2 weeks from now. I haven't done a crossword until today for the last 6 days, so bit of practice needed to get rid of the rust, perhaps, if that can form over 6 days. But what it does also do is it means that because I haven't solved the last few days of puzzles, I can do them in batches, which is, I suppose, helpful preparation for the championships, where you will get 2 sets, if you make the final, of 3 puzzles at a time to do. So what I did today was do the last 3 days of puzzles. First today's Fridays, then, which order did I do them in? I think I did Wednesdays, then Thursdays, then today, Fridays. So the solve that you're watching is me doing Wednesday. And after that one's complete, I'll move on to Thursday, which you might have seen Simon solve yesterday, so you can compare my solve to his, if you will. And then I'll move on to today's puzzle, Friday, and you can watch that one get solved as well. I will make some comments, probably a few more when we get to the later puzzles, but I think during this one, it was worth saying, the first couple of clues I looked at, I thought this was going to be a slightly more difficult puzzle, but in fact then once I got, I think it was Scarlatti and Avert at 4 and 5 down, they were fairly straightforward and they fed into the rest of the grid quite quickly, and I realized it was probably going to be a more straightforward puzzle. By the time I got to the 2 long answers across the middle, as usual, they are very important, and sometimes, quite often, long answers will be quite accessible for the reasons I've explained before, because to keep the clue succinct, there's only really one type of wordplay going on. So if you can identify what that is, you can really make progress. And I think with Against the Grain, I already had something in the grid that made it look like it might be against to start, and it mentioned something that could easily have been grain. So that was quite straightforward given the enumeration 735. And I was quite lucky, I think, to see the anagram of the African Queen and spot that that was a possible film quite quickly. I think it said classic film in the clue, and it's quite interesting. You get to know what a compiler will consider a classic film, and it won't be something that's within the last 20 or 30 years normally. That would be quite unusual. It'll be something that in some way went into film history, like a Fritz Lang film, or more likely was from what's considered Hollywood's golden age. And I think the African Queen with Humphrey Bogart probably qualifies for that. And apologies to film buffs if I've got that wrong. That's quite possible. So you do get to know the conventions and to be able to narrow your focus quite a bit when something like a classic film is mentioned. So this is yesterday's puzzle, number 26860, and in fact I solve very similar in some ways to Simon's. I think he looked at one across and considered greasy something and immediately put in one down, gosh, went back to one across a bit later and realized it was greasy pole. A neat clue, I think, about a sun, that's AS, blocking, i.e. interrupting a dull European, which is a grey pole, and giving you a difficult route to the top, which is a greasy pole. Now, the very contrasting issue with this puzzle for me, which I found quite a difficult puzzle, was that, as I said a moment ago, the long answers either provide an easy way in to parts of the grid or to the whole puzzle, or they can be pretty convoluted and very hard to actually identify, in which case you're not getting help in terms of checking letters for large parts of the puzzle, and you've still got blanks of white real estate to fill in. And so the importance of the difficulty of the long clues and the speed of solving them can't be overstated. They really are very important. And in this puzzle, I think you'll find as it develops, I don't get the long answers for a long time, and that's a real handicap in solving the puzzle. I think at 12 across at this point, I've looked at it at some point and it said filmmakers, and looking at the 635 enumeration and realizing it's almost certainly and in the middle, well, I have to admit I was led down the road of thinking that this was two famous collaborative filmmakers working together. I'm looking at the clue now as we see. And Banking Grand, I can see that you put a G in it somewhere, but I thought maybe I do know two filmmakers who famously worked together a lot, but I couldn't call it to mind. Now, I saw Simon really struggled with this 15 across that I'm looking at here, which says 15 listener puzzles. I don't get it immediately, but as well as knowing about filmmakers and about kids' TV programs and about Beatrix Potter, which we'll come to, you had to know a bit about rugby for that one. I think Simon eventually understood it when he realised that the 15 in the clue referred to a famous rugby 15, which is Leinster. In fact, I think rugby players these days would argue that the 23, i.e. including all the substitutes, is more important than the 15, but there's no doubt that a 15 is a kind of traditional term for a rugby team, and Leinster are one of the leading home unions provincial rugby teams. So it's a very fair answer, but it's a very difficult clue. And even when you've got some checking letters in the grid and you can see that it's probably an anagram of listener, well, the way the word goes together doesn't make it an easy anagram of listener. I'm lucky in that I had 3 letters in the grid when I came to it. I'm further lucky in that I have some connections with Ireland through my wife, so Leinster is a spelling I know fairly reasonably, which won't apply for some English people. And now I'm looking at 22 across, S something M, Anna Maria's husband, and that describes me as well, that's my wife's name, is lukewarm, she's excited. Well, even when I spotted that there's an anagram in there, and I'm wondering for some time if H for husband is involved. So it could be an anagram of H is lukewarm she, or it could be an anagram of is lukewarm she's. I couldn't think of anything that would fit using those sort of letters. And in the end, what I had to do in my head, because I wasn't using paper for this puzzle, was once I think I thought of the name Samuel as certainly a possible coming out of those letters, That almost certainly fixes the definition of Anna Maria's husband. So I could work out in my head what the other letters in is lukewarm she's that weren't in Samuel were. And once I eventually had those, I was able to realize that the only possible anagram was Whiskers. And somewhere in my head, I knew the name Samuel Whiskers. And I think, rather than Simon, who thought it was from Dickens, I think I was pretty confident it was a Beatrix Potter character, although I couldn't have said what sort. And, you know, I was able at that point to put it in. But again, a very tough across clue. If you don't know your rugby and your Australian slang and, as I say, kids' TV, film companies, this is a tough puzzle. And I hope we get a look at the clue for 11 down in a moment as well, which another long answer that gave me some great difficulty, even though there was very clearly an anagram involved. The only definition was tool, which was quite a sparse definition, and it certainly took me some time to understand how the letters were likely to go together. And in fact, I think you can see during the solve here, I'm concentrating. I've got the Samuel, and I'm confident that's the best first name I'm going to get out of the beginning of the puzzle, out of the beginning of the anagram. And eventually I come up with Whiskers. That then gives me the K in the tool at 11 down, which allows me to think of knife. And then the other letter, again, I had to work out from the anagram fodder exactly what the letters in the first half of the answer were going to be. And I worked out that they were A-E-L, N-T-S, and an unknown. Now that unknown has to kind of be X, Y, or Z. I noticed Simon immediately focused on it being a Y, and you know, I'm impressed that he was that confident. And I eventually got standing. Now, at 21 down, the clue is decorations been lying in case, upside down. And I've put in tinsel, and I was pretty confident about tinsel. And the reason for that is that in case can easily mean lest. The meaning of lest, L-E-S-T, is just in case. And I've reversed lest with the word in, which is in the clue, inside it, and got tinsel, which is perfectly well defined as a decoration. And I was very confident it was right. But then nothing would fit at 25 across. I was certain about War Widow at 16 down, a very, very simple cryptic definition, although you're not expecting one at that point. So, in fact, not simple. So 25 across had to begin something D, and tinsel just wouldn't work. And I had to go back and check the wordplay of 21 down, realize I'd made a false assumption, that I needed a totally different sort of decoration, which was a finial instead. I think it was lane if in reverse. And eventually managed to correct that and move on. But it was one of those astonishing moments where you put in an answer with over 90% certainty, and you have to revisit it quite quickly and go, no, that's not right. And now at this stage, I've just got 2 long answers left. The filmmakers turn out to be just the first part of this phrase, hammer. And I think I eventually got it from realizing that a great deal could be tons around the G, giving something in tongs. And then finally, Sesame Street was fairly obvious once I had all the letters, but not at all before that. I think it was made up of same, S for small, tree, in set, which is very neat wordplay. But I found that a very hard puzzle because of the long answers being very inaccessible. There were some very clever clues, and you know, it was a really neat puzzle, but quite tough to get going with because the long clues were hard, and that was without them being unfair. Now, at the start of today's puzzle, here's a wrong answer straight away, St. Paul's, but I kind of knew it was wrong immediately. The clue is Capital College, so that has to be a double definition, really. And I'm not brilliant on Oxford and Cambridge colleges, although it's likely to be one of those, and there's lots of saints amongst them. And I thought, well, St. Paul's is a familiar saint, and I think I had in mind St. Paul, which is the capital of Minnesota in the States. And I realized as soon as I put St. Paul's in, it was a bit unlikely. So I was happy with the saint, and then worked on 6 and 7 down, which were fairly easy, happily. And so realized that what we needed was St. John's. I still couldn't tell you whether that was at Oxford and Cambridge, but I do know Oxford or Cambridge, but I do know that St. John's is the capital of Antigua. So that was a reasonably straightforward answer. 15 across, just gone in there, court. Now there, what the setter has used there is a homophone for the word court, C-O-U-R-T, and that's not going to work in an awful lot of people's accents. It happens that in my largely RP, received pronunciation accent, court as in captured does sound like court as in where you go on a criminal charge, but for most accents, especially in America, anywhere north of a line that I think is drawn between the Severn Estuary and the Wash, there's going to be a rhotic accent that doesn't work for. So I'm not a fan of homophones that don't always work for everybody. There are plenty of homophones that do, and I don't think setters need to rely on those. Now 9 across, memorable dog having left for second. It does look like you need to replace an S with an L, but how can that turn a dog into memorable? Well, it does, because a red setter with its S becoming L becomes red letter, and a red letter day is a memorable day. So very impressive use of a coincidence in the language there. Fairly neatly worded clue, well, I'm not quite sure. I suppose it would imply that some memorable dog has left for a second of time, but that wasn't entirely clear to me. Again, the long answer here wasn't quick for me, but once I'd got the C at the start, I could see that was cut down to size. This look, you had to ignore the possible anagram fodder of overturning beer ban at 13 across. Is a French writer. Although beer ban looks like it's kind of had letters put in to feed an anagram, in fact, the beer ban is an ale bar going backwards to give Rabelais, who is, I was going to say, a reasonably familiar writer. I'm not going to claim I know a lot of his work or have read it, but certainly he would be one of the first few writers who were French that would come to mind. This is a lovely clue at 12 down. What could spawn new desires, for example? This is one of those and-lits where the wordplay acts as the whole clue, as the whole definition. And what you're looking for there is an anagram of N for new, desires, and EG for example. So you have to turn a couple of the words in the clue into their very familiar abbreviation. And what could spawn new desires, for example, is greediness, which is, as I say, very clever wording, because greediness could spawn new desires, for example. And the word greediness, as considered as a collection of letters, could, if you rearranged it, spawn N desires, e.g. So I'm very impressed with the wording of that. I've certainly never seen that and lit in any form before. Very neat. Now, 22 across, the other long answer in this puzzle. Drink no longer available in canteens, it changed. Again, there's some anagramming in there, but instant coffee, though it's fallen out of fashion, is of course still available. The no longer available in the clue is off, which fits into instant coffee and makes quite an amusing surface reading, in that there probably are some canteens where it's changed. You can no longer get instant coffee. You get your Americano or espresso or cappuccino or something. And I quite liked the clue in terms of kind of reflecting the real world. 16 down. I've had a look at a couple of times at this point. I haven't realised what it is. Pitch isn't black when it's this, and that makes you think of pitch, the tarry substance, which is always black. So how could it be not black when it's something else? Well, a pitch wouldn't be black, even in the night time, if it was floodlit. So that's quite a neatly worded clue as well. That's a cryptic definition. There's no specific wordplay there, but you're misled by the expected meaning of the word in the clue into thinking of the wrong kind of meaning for that word. So if it had said, football pitch isn't black when it's this, well, that wouldn't be a cryptic definition because you'd be directed to think of a floodlit football pitch effectively. 20 down in this puzzle. This had been a fairly easy puzzle until this point. I mean, easy, maybe medium easy, but 20 down, S something E, 3 something Z, local name for land I found in small strip. I didn't know what to think, and now I've got an I in 4th place, and the only word I can think of that fits is sterile. That doesn't really fit the clue in any way. I was beginning to wonder about local being a noun for a local anaesthetic. Eventually I realised that it was the local's name for a land, so it's a country in its own local language, and I consider myself quite lucky that I've been to Sweden a few times and know that in Sweden is Sverige. Apologies to Swedes if you don't like my pronunciation, it's probably very poor. I know a little about Danish pronunciation, but very little about Swedish, and what a hard word that is to have in the Times crossword. And even the wordplay is I in verge after S for small. Really extremely difficult. I haven't looked at the comment on the puzzle today, but I'd be very surprised if there isn't a lot of comment about the difficulty of that answer, which was neither easy from the definition, nor the wordplay, nor the knowledge required. Some very interesting puzzles there. One very hard one in the middle, and then one very hard answer at the end. But very enjoyable, quite nice to come back to from Bangalore, and a very enjoyable time. So thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you again on Cracking the Cryptic. Thanks for your time.